The inheritance papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who seemed embarrassed to hand over such an official envelope for what everyone in Millfield knew was worthless property. Sage Whitmore stared at the legal document spread across her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she read the same impossible words again and again. Her eccentric Aunt Mercy had left her the old cabin in the hills, the one everyone joked about, the one that hadn't seen proper maintenance in 30 years. 6 months had passed since Aunt Mercy's funeral, where distant relatives whispered about the crazy woman who chose to live alone in that decaying structure instead of moving to town like a sensible person. Sage remembered visiting as a child, climbing over broken fence posts and dodging loose boards on the porch, while her aunt told wild stories about hidden treasures and secret discoveries. Everyone assumed Mercy had lost her mind in those final years, talking nonsense about geological surveys and mineral rights that made no sense to anyone. The cabin sat on 47 acres of rocky terrain that real estate agents had tried to sell for decades without success. The land was too remote for development, too harsh for farming, and too small for ranching. Local contractors estimated it would cost more to repair the structures than to tear them down and start fresh. Even the county assessor valued the entire property at barely $15,000, most of that tied up in the land itself, rather than any improvements. Sage folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. As a librarian at the town's small public library, she earned enough to cover her modest apartment rent and basic expenses, but inheriting property meant property taxes and maintenance responsibilities she couldn't afford. She had planned to visit the cabin this weekend, perhaps take some photographs for sentimental reasons before putting it up for sale at whatever price someone might offer. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Emma, asking about dinner plans, but Sage barely registered the message. Something nagged at her about Aunt Mercy's final months, the way she had insisted the cabin was more valuable than anyone realized. The old woman had seemed unusually serious during their last conversation, pressing a small brass key into Sage's hand and saying something about checking the foundation stones on the east side. Sage retrieved the key from her jewelry box, where she had stored it after the funeral. It was old and tarnished, with an unusual octagonal head that didn't match any lock she had ever seen. Aunt Mercy had been specific about the east foundation, but specific about what exactly remained unclear. The drive to the cabin would take 3 hours on winding mountain roads, time Sage couldn't really afford to lose on her weekend. But something in her aunt's voice during that final visit suggested there might be more to discover than crumbling wood and broken dreams. What she found there would change everything, though she had no way of knowing that, as she tucked the mysterious key into her purse and began planning her trip to the mountains. The mountain road twisted through dense pine forests, each turn revealing another vista of rocky peaks and deep valleys that stretched toward the horizon. Sage gripped the steering wheel tighter as her compact car struggled with the elevation gain, the engine working harder than she was comfortable with. She had forgotten how isolated Aunt Mercy's property truly was, miles from the nearest neighbor, and accessible only by this single winding dirt road that seemed to grow narrower with each passing mile. When she finally reached the familiar wooden gate, hanging crooked on rusted hinges, Sage felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and unease. The cabin looked even worse than she remembered, its roof sagging in places, and several windows boarded up with plywood that had weathered to a dull gray. Weeds had overtaken what used to be a small garden, and the wooden steps leading to the front porch creaked ominously under her weight. She used her aunt's old house key to unlock the front door, stepping into a musty interior filled with dust motes dancing in shafts of afternoon sunlight. The furniture remained exactly as Aunt Mercy had left it, covered in white sheets that gave the rooms a ghostly appearance. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, images of relatives Sage barely remembered, and some she didn't recognize at all. Following her aunt's instructions, Sage walked around to the east side of the cabin and knelt beside the stone foundation. The rocks were large and irregularly shaped, fitted together with mortar that had cracked and crumbled in several places. She ran her fingers along the stones, searching for anything that might correspond to the unusual brass key she carried. Near the corner where two foundation walls met, she discovered a small depression in one of the stones, partially hidden behind overgrown blackberry vines. When she cleared away the vegetation, she could see that someone had carved a shallow octagonal shape into the rock surface. The brass key fit perfectly into this carved space, turning with a grinding sound that suggested it had not been used in many years. Nothing happened at first, and Sage wondered if she had misunderstood her aunt's cryptic instructions. Then she noticed that one of the foundation stones had shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap behind it. With considerable effort, she managed to work the stone loose and pull it away from the wall, exposing a small cavity that had been hidden for decades. Inside the space, wrapped in multiple layers of oiled cloth, she found a metal box about the size of a shoebox. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out and carried it back to the cabin's porch, where the light was better for examination. The box was old, but well preserved, with no visible lock or latch mechanism. When she opened the lid, she found stacks of official-looking documents, geological survey maps, and what appeared to be laboratory test results. The top document was a letter addressed to her in Aunt Mercy's distinctive handwriting, dated just 3 months before her death. As Sage began to read, her understanding of everything she thought she knew about the inheritance began to crumble. The letter was written in Aunt Mercy's careful script, each word deliberate and clear despite the tremor that had affected her hands in those final months. Sage read the opening lines with growing amazement as her aunt's voice seemed to speak directly from the pages. The letter began with an apology for the secrecy and an explanation that would have sounded impossible coming from anyone else. Years earlier, Aunt Mercy had commissioned a private geological survey of the property, paying for it with money she had saved from decades of careful living. The surveyors had discovered significant mineral deposits beneath the seemingly worthless land, but Mercy had sworn them to secrecy with substantial financial incentives. She had wanted to protect the discovery from exploitation until she could determine the best way to handle such valuable information. The survey documents detailed the presence of lithium deposits throughout the eastern section of the property, concentrated in areas that could be accessed through careful mining operations. Current market prices for lithium had increased dramatically due to demand from battery manufacturers, making these deposits potentially worth millions of dollars. Additional reports confirmed the presence of rare earth elements that were becoming increasingly valuable for technology manufacturing. Sage studied the geological maps with growing disbelief, comparing them to legal documents that established clear mineral rights ownership. Unlike many Western properties where mineral rights had been sold separately from surface rights, Aunt Mercy held complete ownership of everything beneath her land. The documents showed that she had quietly purchased additional mineral rights from neighboring properties over the years, expanding her holdings without anyone understanding the true purpose behind these seemingly random acquisitions. Bank statements tucked between the geological reports showed substantial payments to various consulting firms and legal offices, evidence that Aunt Mercy had been working with professionals to verify and protect her discovery. She had established a trust fund that would transfer all assets to Sage upon her death, complete with detailed instructions for managing the mineral rights responsibly. The final pages of the letter contained warnings about keeping the discovery secret until Sage could assemble a proper legal and financial team. Aunt Mercy emphasized that news of valuable mineral deposits would attract attention from large mining corporations and wealthy investors who might try to pressure Sage into unfavorable agreements. She recommended specific lawyers and financial advisors who had already been briefed on the situation and were prepared to help when the time came. As Sage finished reading, she realized that every assumption about her inheritance had been completely wrong. The worthless cabin sat atop a fortune that could change her life forever, but it also represented responsibilities and challenges she had never imagined facing. Her quiet life as a small-town librarian suddenly seemed impossibly distant from the complex world of mineral rights and corporate negotiations that now awaited her. She carefully returned all documents to the metal box and locked it securely, her mind racing with questions about what to do next. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the property that would soon be the most valuable land in 3 counties. But Sage had no way of knowing that her discovery was about to attract attention from people who had been watching and waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The drive back to town felt surreal as Sage tried to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. The metal box sat secured in her passenger seat, containing documents that proved she had inherited a fortune beyond anything she could have imagined. She drove carefully on the winding mountain roads, hyper-aware that a single accident could destroy the evidence of her newfound wealth. By the time she reached Millfield, word had somehow spread through the small town that something significant was happening at the old Whitmore property. Sage noticed several unfamiliar vehicles parked near the diner and the gas station, expensive SUVs and luxury sedans that stood out dramatically among the usual pickup trucks and modest family cars. She pulled into her apartment complex feeling increasingly uneasy about the sudden attention. Her phone had been buzzing with missed calls and text messages throughout the drive, most from numbers she didn't recognize. When she finally checked the voicemails, she heard smooth professional voices introducing themselves as representatives of various mining corporations and investment firms. Each caller claimed to have heard about potential development opportunities in the area and expressed urgent interest in discussing purchase options for any available land. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone had been monitoring geological surveys or tracking mineral rights transfers, and news of her inheritance had triggered immediate corporate interest. Sage realized that Aunt Mercy's warnings about keeping the discovery secret had come too late. The professional surveying work had left trails in government databases that sophisticated companies could access and analyze. Her neighbor Emma knocked on the apartment door that evening, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. She had heard rumors at the beauty salon about wealthy investors asking questions around town, specifically inquiring about the Whitmore property and anyone who might have inherited it recently. Emma's cousin worked at the county clerk's office and had mentioned unusual activity in the property records department. 3 different law firms requested copies of your inheritance paperwork today, Emma explained as she poured wine into mismatched glasses. And someone from Dallas called the mayor's office asking about zoning regulations and environmental impact procedures. People are saying there might be oil or gas deposits up there. Sage listened carefully without revealing what she knew, but her anxiety increased with each detail Emma shared. The corporate interest was moving faster than Aunt Mercy had anticipated, and Sage felt completely unprepared to handle negotiations with experienced business professionals. She had no idea how to evaluate offers or protect herself from exploitation. The next morning brought a surprise visitor to the library where Sage worked. Clayton Harrington III arrived in a black Mercedes sedan that cost more than most houses in Millfield, wearing an expensive suit that made him look like he had stepped out of a business magazine. He introduced himself as the CEO of Harrington Energy Solutions and requested a private conversation about a matter of mutual benefit. Miss Whitmore, I believe you've recently come into possession of some very interesting property, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'd like to discuss an opportunity that could be quite profitable for both of us. Clayton Harrington possessed the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively step aside when he entered a room. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair that suggested experience and success, but his eyes held a calculating intensity that made Sage uncomfortable. He spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted from every negotiation. I represent a consortium of investors interested in developing mineral resources throughout this region, he explained while examining the modest library with obvious disdain. We've identified several properties with significant potential, and your recent inheritance appears to be particularly promising. I'm authorized to make a very generous offer for immediate purchase of your land and all associated rights. Sage tried to maintain her composure despite feeling completely out of her depth. She had expected corporate interest eventually, but not this quickly or aggressively. Harrington's presence in her small-town workplace felt invasive and threatening, as if he was deliberately demonstrating his ability to find her anywhere she might try to hide. I'm not interested in selling, she said quietly, hoping her voice didn't reveal how intimidated she felt. The property has sentimental value, and I haven't had time to consider my options properly. Harrington's smile became predatory. Miss Whitmore, I don't think you understand the complexities involved in mineral extraction and the substantial costs required for proper development. Individual property owners rarely have the resources or expertise necessary to manage such projects effectively. My offer would eliminate all risk and provide immediate financial security. He placed a leather folder on the circulation desk and opened it to reveal documents that made Sage's eyes widen with shock. The purchase offer was for $12 million, more money than she could have imagined possessing in several lifetimes. But something about Harrington's eagerness to close the deal immediately made her suspect the property might be worth significantly more than even this astronomical amount. I need time to think, she said, closing the folder without examining the details. This is a major decision that requires careful consideration. Harrington's expression darkened slightly, revealing glimpses of the ruthless businessman beneath his polished exterior. Time is a luxury you may not have, Miss Whitmore. Word of mineral discoveries spreads quickly in this industry, and other interested parties are already making inquiries. My offer represents fair market value plus a substantial premium for immediate closure. He leaned closer across the desk, lowering his voice to a tone that carried subtle menace. I would hate to see you lose this opportunity because you waited too long to make a smart decision. Competition in this business can become quite intense, and not all players operate with the same ethical standards that I maintain. After Harrington left, Sage sat alone in the empty library feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation she faced. $12 million would solve every financial problem she had ever worried about, but something in Harrington's behavior suggested he was trying to pressure her into a decision before she could discover the true value of what she owned. She retrieved Aunt Mercy's letter from her purse and reread the warnings about corporate pressure and unfavorable agreements. Her aunt had anticipated exactly this scenario and provided specific recommendations for legal representation. As Sage remained silent, Clayton's business mask slipped slightly, revealing something more personal in his gaze. "Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner tomorrow evening," he said, his tone shifting from corporate to intimate. "I find myself quite fascinated by you, Miss Whitmore. Your intelligence and independence are refreshing qualities I rarely encounter in my business dealings." His eyes lingered on her face longer than necessary, making it clear his interest extended beyond the property she owned. But as Sage reached for her phone to call the attorneys Aunt Mercy had recommended, she realized that accepting help would mean trusting people she had never met with information that could change her life forever. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor, but this one arrived with a completely different approach than Clayton Harrington's intimidating corporate presence. River Castellanos knocked softly on the library's front door 30 minutes before opening time, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look more like a local rancher than a high-powered attorney. "Miss Whitmore? I'm River Castellanos from the environmental law firm your Aunt Mercy recommended," he said with a warm smile that immediately put Sage at ease. "I know the situation must feel overwhelming, and I wanted to offer my assistance without any pressure or obligations. Your aunt was very specific about protecting your interests." Unlike Harrington's polished arrogance, River possessed a quiet confidence that seemed genuine and trustworthy. He was roughly her age, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that conveyed both competence and compassion. When he handed her the coffee, their fingers touched briefly, and Sage felt an unexpected spark of attraction that caught her completely off guard. "Mercy contacted our firm 6 months ago," River explained, as they sat at one of the library's reading tables. "She wanted to ensure you would have proper legal representation when this situation arose. We've been monitoring corporate activity in mineral rights acquisitions, and yesterday's visit from Harrington Energy Solutions confirms her concerns were justified." River opened a leather briefcase and spread several documents across the table, but his approach felt collaborative rather than overwhelming. He explained complex legal concepts in terms Sage could understand, outlining her rights and options without pushing any particular course of action. His respect for her intelligence and autonomy stood in stark contrast to Harrington's condescending assumptions. "The lithium deposits on your property are worth significantly more than Harrington's offer," River said, showing her recent market analyses and comparable sales data. Conservative estimates put the total value at over $40 million, possibly much higher depending on extraction costs and market conditions. His $12 million offer represents less than 30% of fair market value. As they talked, Sage found herself drawn to River's passion for environmental protection and fair business practices. He spoke about sustainable mining techniques and community impact assessments with an enthusiasm that seemed entirely genuine. Unlike Harrington, who treated the land as nothing more than a source of profit, River understood the broader implications of mineral extraction on local ecosystems and communities. "There's something else you should know," River said, his expression becoming more serious. "Harrington has a reputation for hostile takeovers when friendly negotiations fail. If you refuse his offers, he may try more aggressive tactics to pressure you into selling. Corporate bullying, frivolous lawsuits, attempts to tie up your property in legal challenges that could last for years." Their conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of expensive tires on gravel outside. Through the library windows, they could see a silver Bentley pulling into the parking lot, followed by a black SUV that screamed executive security detail. Clayton Harrington emerged from the luxury vehicle, but this time he was not alone. "That would be Marcus Steele," River said quietly, recognizing the second man who stepped out of the Bentley. "Oil and gas billionaire from Houston. If he's here, it means word about your property has reached the highest levels of the energy industry." Sage watched through the window as both men approached the library entrance, realizing that her quiet life had just become infinitely more complicated. Marcus Steele entered the library with the commanding presence of a man accustomed to owning everything he desired. He was older than Harrington, perhaps in his early 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of outdoor adventures and unlimited resources. His tailored Western-style suit probably cost more than Sage earned in 6 months, but he wore it with casual elegance that made expensive clothing look effortless. "Miss Whitmore," Steele said, removing his hat with old-fashioned courtesy that felt both charming and calculated. "Marcus Steele, from Steele Energy Corporation. I apologize for interrupting, but I understand Clayton here has been monopolizing your time with business discussions. I thought you might appreciate hearing about alternative opportunities." The tension between the two billionaires was immediately apparent, crackling through the small library like electricity before a thunderstorm. Harrington's jaw tightened visibly at Steele's casual dismissal of his negotiations, while Steele smiled with the confidence of someone who had never lost a competition that mattered to him. "Mr. Steele, I believe Miss Whitmore and I were in the middle of finalizing our agreement," Harrington said coldly, stepping closer to Sage in a gesture that seemed protective but felt possessive. "Your timing is rather poor." "On the contrary," Steele replied smoothly, "I think my timing is perfect. Miss Whitmore deserves to hear all her options before making such an important decision." He turned his attention fully to Sage, and she felt the full force of his charismatic personality focused on her like a spotlight. "I'm prepared to offer $25 million for your property, plus a substantial signing bonus if we can reach an agreement today." River shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly recognizing the tactics both men were employing. The competition had nothing to do with fair market value, and everything to do with male dominance, and the thrill of winning something another man wanted. Sage found herself caught in the middle of a power struggle that made her feel more like a prize than a person. "Furthermore," Steele continued, "I'd like to invite you to dinner at the Riverside Resort tomorrow evening. I think you'll find my approach to business much more collaborative than others you may have encountered." His smile was warm and inviting, but his eyes held the same calculating intensity she had seen in Harrington. Harrington stepped forward aggressively. "Miss Whitmore already has dinner plans tomorrow evening," he said firmly, as though speaking for her was his right. "And my offer includes development partnerships that would provide ongoing income rather than a simple one-time payment, plus certain personal considerations that I believe she'll find quite appealing." The way both men spoke about her as though she wasn't present made Sage's temper flare. River seemed to sense her growing anger and placed a gentle hand on her arm, grounding her in the moment. The contrast between his respectful support and the billionaire's presumptuous behavior was stark and revealing. "Gentlemen," Sage said, standing up with more confidence than she felt, "I appreciate your interest, but I'm not making any decisions about my property today, and I'm certainly capable of managing my own social calendar without assistance from either of you." Both men looked surprised by her assertiveness, clearly unaccustomed to women who didn't immediately defer to their wealth and authority. But Sage noticed something else in their expressions that made her stomach turn with realization. Neither of these men had shown any interest in her as a person before she inherited valuable property, and both were treating her like an acquisition to be won, rather than a human being deserving of respect. That evening, Sage sat in her apartment reviewing everything that had happened since she first opened Aunt Mercy's inheritance papers. The metal box containing the geological surveys rested on her kitchen table, surrounded by business cards from both Billionaires and legal documents River had left for her consideration. The contrast between their approaches had crystallized her understanding of the situation she faced. Over the past 3 days, she had watched Clayton Harrington and Marcus Steele compete for her attention, with increasingly elaborate displays of wealth and charm. Expensive flower arrangements arrived hourly at the library, each accompanied by handwritten notes promising exotic vacations and exclusive social opportunities. Both men had called repeatedly, their conversations shifting from business negotiations to personal compliments about her intelligence and beauty. But Sage could see through their sudden romantic interest with painful clarity. Neither man had bothered to learn anything meaningful about her personality, her dreams, or her values. Their compliments focused on superficial qualities, and their gifts reflected assumptions about what any woman would want, rather than anything specific to who she was as an individual. They were courting an idea of her, not the reality of her life and character. River Castellanos represented something entirely different. During their conversations about legal strategies and environmental protection, He had asked thoughtful questions about her work as a librarian and her hopes for the future. He listened when she spoke about her concerns for the local community and the responsible development of natural resources. Most importantly, he had been helping her navigate this complex situation before either billionaire arrived, motivated by professional ethics rather than personal gain. The next morning brought a decisive moment when all three men appeared at the library simultaneously. Clayton and Marcus had apparently coordinated their arrival to force her into making an immediate choice between their competing offers, each now exceeding $30 million, and including marriage proposals that made Sage's stomach turn with their calculated romanticism. "Miss Whitmore," Clayton announced, "I'm prepared to offer $40 million in a wedding that will be featured in every major magazine in the country. Think of the social opportunities, the lifestyle you could enjoy as my wife." Marcus countered immediately. $50 million plus a ranch in Montana where we could build our life together. I can provide everything you've ever dreamed of, and more than you could imagine wanting. River watched this display with obvious distaste, then stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Sage," he said, using her first name with the familiarity of genuine friendship, "whatever you decide about your property, please remember that your worth as a person isn't determined by what you own. You deserve someone who valued you before you had anything to offer except yourself." The truth of his words hit her with stunning clarity. She looked at the two billionaires, seeing them clearly for the first time as men who were competing for a trophy rather than courting a woman they actually knew and respected. Their wealth and status meant nothing if they couldn't see her as anything more than an acquisition. "Gentlemen," Sage said with newfound confidence, "my property is not for sale at any price. I intend to develop the mineral rights myself, with proper legal guidance and environmental protections. As for your marriage proposals, I'm not interested in becoming anyone's prize for winning a business competition." She turned to River with a smile that felt like coming home. "But I would very much like to have dinner with someone who knew my name before he knew my net worth." If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.